This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension, we were in standing finance committee. We revert to such.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee.
You can post it on.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman, Head 83, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security, in the amount of $46,060,695. I remember first thing.
Honourable Member for St. Philip South.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to present in this Appropriation Bill 2022. With your leave, I wish to join my team in committee room for us to further elaborate and do our presentation.
You may so do, Honourable Member.
Thank you.
We do that.
Chair.
Honourable member, you may proceed with your opening remarks and also to introduce your team. Thank you.
Chair, I will start by first introducing my team. To my right is Permanent Secretary, Mr. Terry Bascom. To my left is Ms. Keely Holder, Chief Agricultural Officer. We have with us Dr. Beverly Wood, Director of Government Analytical Services. Dr. Mark Trotman, Senior Veterinary Officer. Dr. Leroy McLean, Consultant to the Ministry on Black Belly Sheep Program. Mr. Anthony Bryan, Chairman of BMCLA, Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority. Mr. Frederick Ennis, CEO Acting, BADMC. Ms. Kimberly Coppin, Financial Controller. Mr. Glenn Marshall, Senior Agriculture Officer. Mr. Michael James, Senior Agriculture Officer. Mr. Wayne Baker, Director of Projects. Mr. Orlando Atherley, CEO, BAMC. Mrs. Cheryl Morris-Keat, Deputy Permanent Secretary. Dr. Jamaica Andrele, Manager Agricultural Services, BADMC. Mr. Sherlock King, Manager of Markets. And Mr. Robert Saul, Senior Economist, Acting. And Senator Shanika Roberts Odo, Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority. Chair, over the last year, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security would have been in the vanguard of providing agricultural support to the sector. During this time, we would have been impacted by the COVID pandemic, and just like many others, we have had our challenges with people being infected with the virus. Nonetheless, the ministry continued its work and was able to move forward with a number of programs and projects in order for us to provide assistance to the sector and to be able to move our farmers forward. Our goal is to be able to increase production in Barbados while taking advantage of the linkages and the opportunities available to us for transboundary agriculture in Guyana and Suriname and in the African continent. In order for us to achieve our objectives, we must be in a position to provide the services that are required across the sector for our farmers and stakeholders to be able to participate. Equally, we must find space also for us to be able to anchor our legislative framework so that our legislation and our policy objectives would find a marriage. The ministry throughout the period has been working assiduously to make sure we can get increase in production in difficult times, given the impact of climate change, where we would on one hand see prolonged droughts, on the other hand, we would have seen extensive flooding where crops would have been lost. Of course, all of us do know the impact on the sector from the ashfall, the freak storm, and Hurricane Elsa. In 2021, in spite of all of the challenges, we were able to see growth in certain crop productions. And that growth took place for the production of yam, which increased 42%, Bonavis 113%, squash 15%, bananas 16%, plantain increased tremendously, 173%, and zucchini 27%. Many of our short crops were impacted heavily, either because of the drought or heavy rain. Equally, our livestock sector would have been impacted, and I'm pleased to report that poultry is the one area where we were able to continue to see continuous growth over 2020 by some 13%. In order for us to move the sector forward, we have identified a number of initiatives within the ministry so that we can bring the sector to a modern 21st century requirement. And so we have started in 2019 a Farmers Empowerment and Enfranchisement Drive, the FEED program. This is the ministry's flagship program and is designed to expose applicants to farming practices and provide them with 1 acre of land to start. The program is managed by the BADMC. To date, we have moved 603 persons successfully through the training. 148 are already processed on their pre-existing qualifications and training. This presents 52% of the persons who have applied to the program. There are some 32 Project CARE participants that have also been moved forward, and the ministry will continue to work on this program to make sure that we can provide participants with land, adequate water supply, and move towards increased production in Barbados. The BADMC, through its Irrigation Department Engineer Unit, continues to deliver a dedicated irrigation water supply to over 500 farmers in 12 irrigation districts across the island. The corporation is currently re-evaluating its land and water resources to provide accurate figures on the acreage available for irrigation crop production and the acreage for rain-fed agriculture. The project at Wakefield, which is part of the Community Agricultural Response and Empowerment Project, or CARE, has seen preparations done for 32 persons. They have all been trained and will be placed on 27 acres of land at Wakefield. The ministry will also be executing the Urban Layers and Food Security Program, which is known to all of us as the Layers Project. This is a public-private partnership between BADMC and CO Williams Construction for the lease of 100 acres of land at Layers. The lease is for 15 years with the option to extend. The project includes an allotment gardening program, which will be a first to Barbados, and community gardens and urban and peri-urban gardeners. The ministry and the BADMC invited expressions of interest, and when launched, over 139 persons responded. Infrastructure works included the installation of prepared water meters for the project to reach 30% completion by March 31st has been started. The ministry and the BADMC will construct and maintain a vending area, including amenities at Layers for lessees who wish to sell their produce. A solar-powered freight container farm will be provided as a pilot, and the project will have the collaboration to suit farmers and young entrepreneurs. The targeted completion of this project is placed for July this year. At Pine Basin, the Pine Basin Land Lease and Food Security Program will be redeveloped as a combination of allotment gardening taken from the same model being used at Layers and commercial farming, with gardening being supported through the CARE program and farming being supported through the FEED program. The program is also being managed by the BADMC. Several areas around the Pine Basin experienced flooding during the rainy season. mainly due to surface runoff from surrounding districts. Over the years, this has resulted in damages to crops and losses for several farmers. The following actions are recommended for the redevelopment of the area: upgrade of the road infrastructure, rehabilitation of one suck well, a recharge well, installation of individual water meters, and irrigation and drainage study of the Pine Basin. Medicinal cannabis. We have already established the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority. As at December of last year, 71 draft applications have been submitted through the online system, 9 of which have been paid for. Approximately 500 stakeholders have been engaged in discussions through various forums. 6 memoranda of understanding have been signed to facilitate the efficiency of the medicinal cannabis regime. A draft contract for traceability, seed-to-sale software has been developed. The ministry submitted a cabinet paper with proposals for the enfranchisement of Barbadians in the medicinal cannabis industry through 1, the establishment of a vertically integrated company, and 2, the integration of a cannabis cultivation component in the existing feed program. A national fruit orchard has been established at Haggots in St. Andrew. The Haggots Reservoir has been completed and improved upon by installing a liner, spillway, and slip track. Fruit trees have been planted at Haggots, and these include soursop, golden apple, and passion fruit. We have 12 acres so far being cleared and ready for further cultivation. A water augmentation program. We started our water augmentation program to provide assistance for the farmers. The project is aimed at relieving the woes of farmers who suffer from scarcity of water in the dry season. The work at River is about 85% complete, with the lining of the 6 million gallon catchment being the major component to be carried out. Phase 1 of this project is expected to be completed next month. At Spring Hall, 6 suck wells at Spring Hall have been cleaned and rehabilitated. The BADMC is engaged in discussions currently to provide a reservoir that is proposed to give 70 million gallons of water to the farmers at Spring Hall. We took to Cabinet a paper to discuss a sanitary and phytosanitary legislation and establish a single agency for the National Agriculture, Health, and Food Control Program. Work is currently ongoing on that legislation. We have been able to proceed successfully with the legislation for plant protection. The FAO has provided US $35,000 to develop a traceability system for fish. Comments on the plant protection bill and animal health and veterinary public health bill were submitted to the Chief Parliamentary Council. The ministry is waiting on the official comments of the Ministry of Health and Wellness regarding the food safety and quality bill, and we expect to have those comments in so that we can move the establishment of the single agency and get the legislation in place for our SPS, which is a project that has been outstanding for a tremendous amount of time, and I'm sure will be of great importance to Barbados and given us the ability to export to the EU. Many of the standards within the SPS regime have already been implemented by the ministry through its work in dealing with importation of meats, in dealing with importation of plants. We have to now standardize and get the legislation in place for us to have the full suite of legislation and establish a full SPS regime. But we have been following protocols similar to what is required. Predatory larceny, we have done full work with all stakeholders for radio larceny, and the legislation is near completion. The ministry is to meet with CPC, and we are about to have this legislation ready to come to Parliament by next month.
Honourable Minister, you may proceed to wrap up. I'm sure you'll have plenty more time during the course of your ministry's time in the well. We'll have plenty more time to expound. Please proceed to wrap up your introductory remarks.
So those are the main initiatives under the ministry. Our Black Belly Chic program is ongoing. The sugar industry obviously is also one that we're dealing with. The sugar harvest is about to start next month, and we have done significant work on our markets, our apiculture industry, and our livestock industry. We have done the Cuscus Grass program and have entered into relations with Guyana, and we've started a program on how we can mitigate against African swine fever. Pesticide management we are working with, upgrading of pesticide legislation, germplasm bank, and establishment of the Sugar Industry Research and Development Committee. So I am obliged to you, Mr. Chair.
Honourable Minister, could you please move the head?
I beg to move that head 83 do now stand for.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Minister and to your entire team who is here. I have a few questions. One you partially addressed in relation to the need for us to be able to export to the EU, or the challenges that we've had in that regard, because this has also been on the cards for a while. What have been those specific challenges, and specifically where are we specifically in that conversation, because this continues to be one of those conversations that the public is having, suggesting that Barbados is not doing enough to be able to fill that particular gap. And so I would like to hear more in relation to where we are. I heard you mention the legislation, but specifically where we are in relation to that particular matter. And then secondly, somewhat tied to it somewhat, is in relation to our labs. One of the challenges that regions like ours would have, developing countries, is that oftentimes it is believed or perceived that the capacity of our labs to be able to do the necessary testing to safeguard the citizens may not necessarily be in place. And I would like to know what is the capacity now in relation to our capacity to test, particularly for things, substances coming into Barbados, to make sure that we safeguard Barbadians, considering the amount of various diseases that we're hearing popping up from time to time all over the place. And then lastly, if I may, Chair, lastly and then very quickly, in terms of the modernization generally of agriculture, what is it that we are doing to ensure in a climate environment where the capacity for our crops and the necessity for our crops to be climate resilient is certainly urgent? What are we doing to modernize agriculture to be able to offer greater yield, considering the the spaces we have with land, considering the quality of our soil in some areas, and so on? So those three questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for your questions. Let me first start with the matter of the SPS. The challenges that we've had with the SPS was perhaps more difficult for us to manage when Britain was part of the EU. But with Britain moving away from the EU, we have opportunities available outside of the EU to do trade. However, there are certain things that we must follow under the World Trade Organization Agreement on SPS measures. And this means that the measures must be implemented to ensure that food is safe for consumption and to prevent entry into Barbados of pests and diseases among animals and plants. We have, as I said before, have been implemented a number of the protocols that have come along with what is required for us to protect Barbados from imported plants and meat. And at the same time, we've been also trying to facilitate exports to those countries that are not under the EU and would allow for Barbados to export. The work has been ongoing with many of the ministries involved, and we are at the point where we certainly can deliver the legislation so that we can start the plant protection and the animal health. However, our delay, since you mentioned challenges, is the fact that we have to get the food safety bill anchored as well, and we have to work along with the Ministry of Health and Wellness to be able to get that implemented. Once all of this is done, then we are in a position to trade globally. But the bugbear in all of this would be how we can penetrate Europe, the European Union, and this is where we must put these measures in place to be able to achieve such an objective. I have here with me the officer in charge of anchoring this project, Dr. Beverly Wood. I also have Mr. Michael James from Plant Pathology and Dr. Mark Trotman from Veterinary Services. And what I would do to explain before I come to your other two questions is to let Dr. Wood speak to the issues of SPS and why it has taken us so long to be able to get to where we are, because we're pretty close now to anchoring this. And then I would also have Dr. Trotman and Mr. Michael James explain why it is important for us to have the legislation and why it is important for us to be able to protect Barbados from plants and meats or animals that are imported into Barbados, the importance of food safety. And Dr. Wood would first start by going through where we are at, the consultations that were done, and the importance of having the legislation, but why it took so long for us to get to this point.
Thank you, Minister, and good evening, members of Parliament and colleagues. The SPS legislation is made up of the Food Safety and Quality Bill, the Plant Protection Bill, and the Animal and Veterinary Public Health Bill. We started this project some time ago. What we did was to have an assessment of our legislation, our current legislation, to understand the gaps and the weaknesses that existed. And coming out of that, we have draft legislation that was done. In coming to the draft legislation, we had a number of discussions with the various stakeholders, and they were not able, they made an input into the areas that would be put into the draft. We also had discussions at the CARICOM level, because CARICOM had model legislation prepared for the region in these three areas. And we also then, after that, Barbados, with the assistance of FAO and PAHO, had a consultant to look at that legislation and to improve what we needed here in Barbados and to make it Barbados's draft legislation. Once that had been done, we had, during that process, we had 4 missions from the consultant to Barbados before the draft legislation was prepared. After that, we then had, the legislation was then passed on to CPC for their review, and then they made some amendments to it and sent it back to the ministry. After that, we had discussions within the various entities that formed the NAFCA program, and these were the Department of Commerce, the Barbados National Standards Institution, Veterinary Services, Plant Protection, and also the Ministry of Health and Wellness, their Environmental Health Department. We've been working on those discussions all of last year, and we've had some feedback, and all those feedbacks were then sent back to CPC. We've also had discussions with the stakeholders. in October, November, we had discussions with the Barbados Chamber of Commerce, Inc., Barbados Agricultural Society, all of the importers of animal products, foodstuffs, whatever, to get their feedback and to be able to explain the parts of the legislation to them. Under the WTO SPS agreement, Barbados, once it is changing legislation that will impact on its trading partners, we had to send it out to the WTO committees. And therefore, through our office in Geneva, it was sent out for 90 days for their comments. And we had to wait on that, the arrival of those comments, and they are now back. As the minister said, we are fairly close to completing the Animal and Veterinary Public Health Bill and the Plant Protection Bill. We are waiting, as he said, the comments of the Ministry of Health to finalize the Food Safety Bill. And once that is done, those comments will go back to CPC and be available then for the Attorney General's certificate before they're laid in Parliament. But we have followed the procedures in making sure that our stakeholders understand what the changes in the legislation will bring, and also to our trading partners as well, and gotten their response. Thank you.
Dr. Wood, you may wish also to comment on the second question, which is the question that was raised on the labs
and also about the fish.
Modernize.
Yes, okay. With respect to the question on the laboratories, the Government Analytical Services performs analytical tests on food and also on environmental matters. We do microbiological and chemical analysis of those. I think that we have some of the methods and some of the things that we do, and therefore we support industry who want to, entrepreneurs in terms of the labeling of their product, because as mentioned this morning by the standards body, if you're going to export your product, you have to comply with the label, and therefore for the nutritional labeling, they come to Government Analytical Services to have those things done. These are things like percentage fat, percentage carbohydrates, those type of stuff. We also do microbiological testing on the things to make sure that they're free of pathogenic organisms which can cause harm, and we do so for some of the manufacturers. We do so for hotels. We do so for aviation, aircrafts, and so. One of the challenges that we do have is the staff complement. We need to have, I think, more staff to be able to accommodate all the tests that need to be done. Two of the areas that we want to improve on is our ability to analyze for pesticide residues and for veterinary drug residues. We have some analytical equipment. We are getting some assistance from the IAEA in having one of those brought back into service because there was a challenge with it. We are also, in this year's estimates, put money in place to replace one of our pieces of analytical equipment. And we are in the process of trying to, I've also made some contacts with the IAEA in being able to get some assistance in training some of the staff in the use of the equipment, and also the IAEA has also provided us, we are waiting the arrival of that to be able to help us to work on things like veterinary drugs, mycotoxins, and so in feed. So in the year coming, we hope once that we have those equipment and we get some training that we'll be able to bring on board those tests. We also do a number of tests in terms of water quality, in terms for both chemistry and microbiological analysis. And again, to the challenge that we have, I think mainly is the fact that we need a little bit more staff to be able to do these stuff. One of the things that we are working on too is also documented our quality assurance and quality control procedures in view of having the lab accredited for some of the tests. But despite the fact that we are not accredited for some of the tests, we are engaged throughout the year in a number of the quality assurance programs, namely the calibration of our analytical equipment, preventative maintenance programs, as well as proficiency testing. And proficiency testing is where outsider will send us some samples, and therefore, without us knowing what the quantity of the contaminant or the analyte is, and we do work and send it back to that. That is a program to be able to assure that results we generate in the lab meets the international requirements. So that is some of the work that will be ongoing, and we hope to continue that and work on that. With respect to the fish, yes, we have engaged the FAO in assisting us in being able to put systems in place to be able to export fish to the EU. To export fish to the EU, it's not every vessel or every processing plant that can do so. They will first have to have, what will happen is that the EU Food and Veterinary Office will come to Barbados. They will look at our legislation. They will look at the systems that we have in place, our inspection procedures. They will examine whether or not we understand the EU legislation. They did that a few years ago, and they indicated some areas where we had shortfalls. In terms of the things at the landing site at the Bridgetown Fisheries Complex, they said it was not covered, and therefore that has been done. We have also encased the area where the fish were boxed for export. We've also developed some standard operating procedures that are there, and we have also implemented water quality for the water and ice that are used at the fishing vessels and also at the fishing complex. What we are now working on with the FAO's assistance is to be able to look at the EU legislation compared with the Barbados legislation and to see where there are any gaps. That has been done, as well as we are looking not only to export to the EU, but also to maintain our export market to the US. And therefore, the consultant who has worked with us have put a side-by-side EU legislation, Barbados legislation, US legislation, and therefore then to see where the gaps are. We are also expected to have a documented inspection procedure, and there'll be some training of the inspectors. In terms of when the fish arrive at the landing site, they have to be inspected to see whether or not the temperature at which the fish was kept in the ice box is being maintained. And also there's a degradation product that can be found in fish like tuna, and it's called histamines. And therefore then what has happened a few years ago, the Government Analytical Services sent an officer to Ireland to be able to improve that method, and we have put that in place and are ready. So we are now working with one of the processors to be able to do some testing on their product. And also that program will also have to have some templates for the fishing vessels. The traceability program that we are working on with the FAO, and that will start in a few months, will look at putting a traceability system in place starting from at sea, because the EU wants to make sure that fish that is exported to them is caught in illegal and is not unreported fishing. So therefore then we are looking to see what happens, what systems need to be put on some of the fishing vessels. We'll be able to trace what happens when those fish land at the Bridgetown Fishing Complex. Then when it proceeds into the fish markets, the processors, etc., and into the retail space. So we, at the end of that, we are hoping then to have a system in place that we can then implement. So the traceability program is with the FAO's assistance, and then we are hoping that we will have some assistance with them in to be able to put the systems in place, both for the regulators as well as some of the templates for some of the the players in the industry. Thank you.
Honourable Member, you also asked a question about modernizing agriculture and how we are moving to mitigate against climate change. We have, in the feed program document, we spoke to the use of freight farms as a means of mitigating against climate change. There's also hydroponic farming that is currently taking place in Barbados in addition to freight farming. Shade houses are being used, and of course, the ministry has, as part of the feed program, training going on for the use of technology with freight farms and shade houses and hydroponic farms. To elaborate more on this, I would ask the Chief Agriculture Officer to take you through the use of technology in farming, how we are moving with it, how climate impacts the use of greenhouses and hydroponic farming, and to bring you up to date of where we're going in terms of modernizing agriculture.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. As it relates to modernization of the agricultural sector, we want to look at
Ma'am,
both.
CEO, could you please introduce yourself by giving us your name?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Keely Holder, Chief Agricultural Officer at the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Nutritional Security. As it relates to modernization of the agricultural sector, we are looking at both options for the open field as well as for protected agricultural structures such as greenhouses, as well as freight farms. So specifically, as Minister Ware was indicating, as it relates to protected agricultural structures, we have just come back from Guyana, where the Guyana government has agreed, and our Prime Minister has also indicated, that we will receive 25 wooden greenhouse, shade house structures from Guyana. These are 100 feet by 38 feet long in total area. And the government of Barbados will also be purchasing 25 shade houses. Together that will make 50 shade houses, which we will be providing for the small farmers in Barbados. This is an important intervention, specifically in targeting the reduction of imports of sweet peppers, where here in Barbados we know that there is a challenge with birds. And so this will assist in that and allow us to make a big dent in that sweet pepper import in particular. As it relates to the use of greenhouse hydroponics, because of the cost of the system, we've identified that there are certain commodities which can be grown profitably in such systems, and these are lettuce as well as cucumbers and tomatoes as well are the key things, along with specialty melons. And these are areas that would allow farmers to increase production, and these also speak to reducing those top-tiered items in the food import bill. Other areas where we're modernizing the agricultural sector would speak to how we are going to address the open field and increase the productivity in that area. So already the Barbados Agricultural Development and Marketing Corporation has acquired a vacuum seeder, which is a special tractor cultivated type of seeder, which allows us to increase now the production of onions and carrots in particular. We at the Ministry of Agriculture will be embarking on testing more heat-tolerant varieties. This would allow our farmers to be able to grow varieties as the days continue to get hotter, that would allow them to continue to produce at a higher level and increase their yields concomitantly. Additionally, we have a rebate within the Ministry of Agriculture to encourage farmers to increase the use of mulch. Mulch is very important, both plastic mulch in particular as well as fabric mulch. These are critical in helping to reduce water loss. They help to protect the soil from heavy rainfall, which will also lead to increase in diseases to the plants. This would also assist as well in maintaining the soil health, because it would allow us to especially organic types of mulches, it would allow us to improve the soil fertility in the soil. A key flagship area which the ministry has done a lot of work to address the issues of climate change would be water catchments. You would have heard from the minister as it relates to the work that we've been doing on water catchments at both River and Spring Hall, and this work is ongoing. The water catchments are critical because in 1982, we only had the capacity to irrigate about 3,000 acres of land. I'm told by the BADMC that we have moved from having about 20 feet of water in the Spring Hall well to now only having about 12 feet during the wet season. So as a result, water catchments become a key and critical area of innovation that we need to provide to farmers to ensure that they have enough water to be able to adapt to climate change. But that's not all the Ministry of Agriculture will be looking to do. We are looking to embark on pioneering and bringing more digital agriculture to the table. In that regard, using drones in particular to apply pesticides, using drones to do surveillance and monitoring, using drones to also detect if there are pests and disease on plants. This would allow farmers to be more precise in understanding what their issues are and being able to respond. This would help them to reduce both fertilizer and pesticide use. This would, as a result, allow them to be more competitive and increase their productivity. As it relates to climate resilience, additional climate resilience things that we're doing that are not specific to modernization, the NECARP program is a flagship program of the BAMC, and that has been critical in reducing soil erosion from heavy rainfalls. And as you would recall, we often see the mud going into the road from the plantations from these heavy rainfall events. This NECARP program is saving our soils, and already Barbados is a country that has very shallow soils. Our soils tend to be about 2 to 10 feet deep. They're not very deep at all, and so it becomes critical for us to ensure that we maintain as much of that soil as possible. So I think collectively there are a number of programs that we are pioneering and that we are working on to ensure that farmers can respond to the exogenous shocks, particularly from the climate change. We do know as well that we do have the climate mitigation subsidy, so it's not only important for farmers to do the things on farms to assist them in improving their productivity and reducing the impacts, but also there's funding available for farmers to help respond and make them more resilient, because it's not if there's going to be a climate impact, it is how quickly we can recover from it. And those things would allow us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, Minister? Honourable Member?
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Minister, team, thank you for presenting yourself to be questioned. Now, Minister, I believe that we were in the Caribbean, we're slow off the bat in developing a marijuana industry, and we missed the boat almost entirely. I believe that we allowed others who had cried down the whole concept of using marijuana for medicinal purposes or recreational purposes to overjump us, turn it into $1 billion industry in their own countries and have us now on the back foot. I was very pleased when you proposed the establishment of a medical marijuana and industry in Barbados, and also the development of marijuana in all its forms. But I'm concerned, and I know a number of people are questioning exactly where are we in the process. I understand you said that there were a number of applications, and I think 9 persons had paid for the applications, but how far are we away from actually having the regime in place and the infrastructure in place to start production and start exportation and start capitalizing on something that has almost passed us by?
Honourable Member, I thank you for your question. You are indeed correct that it is a $1 billion industry, But this issue of Barbados having a medicinal cannabis industry started with the previous administration. And for some reason, it never got off the ground. When we came to power in 2018, I was able to anchor this in 2019 by getting the legislation passed. We had to do a suite of legislation and then regulations. It so happened that when all of that was completed, COVID hit us. And many of the applicants who we were moving through the system didn't follow through because obviously at a time when there's uncertainty, investment will slow down. This didn't only happen in Barbados, it happened right across all jurisdictions. So it is not unique to Barbados, and indeed I'm happy to note that we are at the point where we can issue some licenses now. People have been asking, but 2020 and 2021 were not kind to us as it relates to any type of investment. And therefore what we sought to do was then to see how we can move Barbadians in that space by creating ecosystems under the FEED program, which is what we are currently looking to advance. We have prepared the cabinet paper and we will continue to work with the Ministry of Finance to be able to put that project in place. As it relates now to the issue of licenses for people who have been in this, who have applied, first of all, there is a protocol under the legislation where you have to do your due diligence. And that due diligence takes a period of time, so it can take as high as 6 months in some instances before you issue a license, because it comes with very strict restrictions. We have to make sure that we clear all of the protocols that are required, and we are at the point of issuing a cultivator license. I know that we are very close also to issuing a therapeutic spa license. And this is all happening now that people are coming out of COVID and feel confident that they can proceed with this large type of investment. Investment in medicinal cannabis is by no means small. It takes huge investment to get in, but the returns are great. The chairman of the BMCLA is here, and I would allow for him to follow up and give you further details as to where we are with licenses and where we are with the applications that are before us. Also, Senator Shanika Roberts is here, and she can also give further details on the licensing and why it took so long.
Thank you very much, Minister Ware. Good evening, members of Cabinet, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anthony Bryan, and I'm the chairman of the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority. As it relates to licenses or applicants going through the system at this point in time, I'm pleased to report that at least 2 applicants are very well advanced in the system. It takes approximately 14 steps before an application actually reaches the board for approval. And before June this year, we are hopeful, based on the applications before us going through the process, that at least 2 applications will be approved for medicinal cannabis licenses. Going forward, we do anticipate that within the next financial year, there will be more persons moving through the process. Minister Ware made mention of the number of applications. However, since that last report, we now have 11 persons going through the application process instead of 9. So things are happening, yes. It might seem slow. However, one of the major challenges relates to the due diligence, as the minister mentioned, not only on a local basis, but also a due diligence looking at international parameters as well. Thank you.
Okay, follow-up question. Minister, I tend to ask questions that are informed by concerns with members of the public as well. What provisions are in place, Minister, to guarantee that Barbadians can hold down a stake in this industry? This is something, as I said, that was prohibited in Barbados for many years, and it would seem patently unfair for us to be getting this industry off the ground, and then the same large corporations from outside and from countries that would have crippled our industry and criminalized our people, that they come in and reap all of the sweets. I know in energy, there's certain guaranteed carve-outs for local investment. What is in place to secure local investment, and especially almost like reparations, to allow the opportunity for those who would previously have been criminalized for, I guess, following the tenets of their religion or any other ideologies, to allow them to participate in this, or just Bajan entrepreneurs as a whole? We don't have the depth of pockets or some of these major medical research firms or the global drug corporations. So there would have to be some measure of protection to guarantee that Barbadians are allowed to participate and benefit from what is one of the fastest growing and perhaps most lucrative developing industries in the world.
Honourable Member, I thank you for your question. Again, let me repeat that we have carved out space for Barbadians who otherwise would not be able to participate in this industry by creating ecosystems through the feed program, where those participants in the feed program who have successfully gone through will not only be planting crops or doing livestock farming, but will also be doing medicinal cannabis. You do know that the feed program comes with full government support to get you started. And once we've carved out those ecosystems, those participants in the feed program who want to do medicinal cannabis will be facilitated through the BMC LA and across the Ministry of Agriculture. We have also gone further by looking at how we can establish an entity called BageCan. And in this entity, it will be solely owned by Barbadians. We have worked out the parameters. We've looked at the cost of it. It creates an opportunity for Barbadians to enter the medicinal cannabis industry. They will be carried just like how we carried the sugar industry for a period of time and then transition onto their own. This matter is currently being pursued with the ministry. We are at the stage where we had prepared the cabinet paper, and once we get the blessings of cabinet, we will be able to deliver for Barbadians to be actual owners in the medicinal cannabis industry. But over and above that, the legislation allows for Barbadians to own 100% of any investment in the medicinal cannabis industry, and that is really similar to what we are doing with renewable energy. But equally, a foreign investor, any foreign direct investment that is coming, must allow for 30% ownership between Barbados and CARICOM. So that in the legislation, we had already prepared for Barbadians to be owners, even if it is foreign investment. And that 30% would mean that Barbadians would have a stake in any investment in medicinal cannabis in the Barbados. And therefore, what we are doing in terms of creating the vertical integration for ownership of all Barbadians who have an interest in the medicinal cannabis industry by way of that 30%. We've also now carved out space by ecosystems coming out of the feed program to provide support to those Barbadians who want to do medicinal cannabis. And then we're looking at creating that entity that allows for total Barbadian ownership supported by government, where government transitions over a period of time. When we looked at the numbers, we recognize that government can get out of that space between 3 to 5 years, and therefore it represents an opportunity for Barbadians to own, whilst at the same time government getting a return on its investment.
final intervention. Minister, I have taken in trying to change my lifestyle somewhat, you gotta do what you can. I try to eat what we call blue food at least once a week. I'm planning to branch into more than once a week. But with COVID, with our concentration on comorbidities, with the fact that we know that Barbados has a high prevalence of NCDs, I think a lot of this has to do with our diet. And when I ask, we have a large number of centenarians in Barbados, and I have a large number in Christchurch East. And when I ask them what it is that they attribute their longevity to, in addition to almost every single one having a nip of something every day, they all grew up on ground provisions and salt fish, ground provisions and flying fish, things that you can pick. It is almost offensive to me when we go to our restaurants in Barbados, or higher class restaurants, for want of a better term, that we see this insistence on things like strawberries and things like foreign imported foods. We see New Zealand lamb. Now, what is your ministry doing to push the production of those things that can be consumed in restaurants, be educating those in Barbados who are in the hospitality industry as to the uses and preparation of indigenous fruits and foods for inclusion in their menu, and just trying as well to educate Barbadians to the benefit of eating what it is that we actually grow. It doesn't make sense alone for us to say, let us put a lot of lands into production if we don't have a market for it. And the best market, if we're talking about food security, is here in Barbados, but that requires a change of mindset as well and a lot of education. So I just want to know what it is that you and your ministry have in the plan to help us to change our lifestyles to something a lot more healthy.
Honourable Member, I thank you again for that question. Well, a number of things came out in the question you asked, and I understand clearly where you're going with this. First of all, let me state that we have introduced in Parliament the Parliamentary Fronts Against Hunger, which is a program anchored by the FAO, and we have started work with that program. The Parliamentary Fronts Against Hunger basically designs to do a lot of what you've asked me, and that is to help us to work with the stakeholders, the Barbados Cancer Society, the Diabetes Association, certainly the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health and Wellness, the Ministry of Commerce, for us to do all of what you've just asked. The program basically speaks to how we can transition Barbadians to a healthy lifestyle. I've spoken to several people who are involved in alternate medicines, and we are looking to meet again to make sure we have the relevant information pulled together and bring people along in terms of public education, as well as working through those stakeholders who are already pushing for us to reduce the use of sweet drinks and those types of things. Consumption of locally grown food, we had a meeting on Tuesday, it was, PS. On Tuesday, we looked at logistics to determine how much food we can grow here in Barbados, certainly for domestic consumption. We met with the Ministry of Tourism there to come back to us with the numbers that are required, because you're correct in saying that if you're growing food and increasing production, you must have the markets. We're looking at a number of things. So we're working with the Ministry of Tourism. They are going through the BHDA to pull the information for us so we can look at provisioning for the tourism industry and for the cruise ships. That meeting saw us engaging other persons, including logistics for cargo carriers. And what we are going to do now is establish a food terminal in Barbados with the assistance of our Minister of Agriculture in Guyana to set up a food terminal at Lears where we will be able to do packaging, storage, blast freezing, and those things, and allow for Barbadians to have greater access to healthy agricultural products but at the same time give us a chance to export some of those things through packaging and storage. So a lot is currently happening as we speak. We certainly are working towards increased production. We have cultivated land in the north of the island at St. Lucie, at Mount Poyer. We are working with the farmers at Spring Hall. We've gone back to Bath to increase production there. And right across the entire island where we're doing work with the farmers at River, we are assisting them with increased production. That way, once we get the production up, a number of things happen. We can do blast freezing, we can do storage. Increased production also results in reduced prices, and at the same time give Barbadians a chance to take advantage with the linkages we have with Guyana and Suriname also to be able to provide additional produce, things that we may very well be able to do research and development with here in Barbados, but cannot grow to the scale that they can grow at, and then allow for us to be able to use the pack house or the food terminal as a center for packaging, using a sort of hub and spoke arrangement to get export through the region and beyond. So I have before me the information which we are going to discuss on Friday at the next Quartet Agriculture meeting, and we should move this process forward very shortly. But production in Barbados is certainly going to be increasing so that you can have greater access to more agricultural produce and reduce the intake of processed foods.
Thank you, Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, colleagues, and thank you, Minister of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security. I want to first start by thanking you and your team for the energy that you've brought to the ministry. A lot of people may not know that my involvement in agriculture dates back quite a while, and is very deep and wide. It dates back pre-1998 when I had to sell lettuce to buy school clothes. And I can sense a new energy in the ministry, but I still am observing some of the perennial problems, like for example, as I speak to farmers coming out of my constituency in the city about not having enough equipment to allow for plowing, etc. And I know that the ministry has an aggressive and ambitious plan to bring a lot of arable land back into production. How do you propose to be successful in this plan if we do not have the requisite equipment to do so? And feel free to use an economy of words because I have a number of questions.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I will do my best to facilitate your questions, and I think you're on the right track with the first question. Critical to all this is the availability of equipment. Let me state to you that I've said to the team at the ministry that if we were to be lacking in equipment, then we need to give a very good explanation, because the Prime Minister had placed before us the opportunity for us to do an audit of all the equipment we have, and then she has also made provisions for us to purchase additional equipment. Equipment across the ministry is at the ministry, which is at Graham Hall itself, at BADMC, at BAMC, and at SOIL. And I've also emphasized to all of them that we are all one government. So there may be additional equipment available to us once we can work with our colleagues in other ministries to be able to access equipment. The issue we have is that if you have a number of projects going on at the same time, it can exhaust the equipment that you have. But there are certain types of equipment that we need if we are going to do what is called breaking hard pan and increasing soil fertility and those types of things. We have to have the equipment to do that, and we are currently making sure that we work on providing the types of equipment that will be required to modernize what is required to address the issue of soil fertility. We know that we have been discussing soil degradation and we have gone as far as looking at how we can improve our soils. What I will do is to allow the Chief Agriculture Officer to elaborate on the type of equipment that is going to be required as we address issues of soil fertility, and also as we look at how we prepare now for increased production and the modernizing of equipment in the system, because I've seen for myself the tremendous amount of things that can be done by equipment that is geared towards modern agriculture.
Right. Thank you, Minister. In answer of the question being asked as it relates to what are we doing to make additional tractor cultivation equipment available, over the past year or so, the ministry had actually, and our SOEs, BADMC as well as BAMC, had put in to purchase a number of pieces of equipment that would assist in this area. Of course, one of the big challenges that we have had has been with shipping supplies and delays of this equipment, and some of these things which we would have ordered since very early last year, in the last financial year, are still to arrive here in Barbados. However, there's a twofold aspect of this issue as it relates to tractor cultivation. Now, tractor cultivation is important to get the land started and have them in a space where farmers can grow. But at the same time, we also have to remember the trade-off to that, which is if we over-cultivate or we cultivate too often, then we are actually breaking down the soil structure. So this is where the encouragement of the farmers to use mulch or different types of mulch, so they actually reduce the amount of cultivation that they require, and particularly cultivation in the wet season. In the wet season, if you have a rainfall event, it will normally take 2 to 3 days before the soil dries out. If the cultivators go in at that time when the soil is still wet, it will damage the soil structure and will impact on the farmers and their capacity to plant and grow, which will also contribute to the hard pans. So this is a critical area that we have been looking at, because of course, if you get these heavy rainfall events, you will get the backup of persons saying they can't get their lands prepared. So one of the things that we have started to do is to encourage the farmers towards the use of mulch, and we are also looking to see how we could assist farmers in being able to efficiently apply mulch. And in fact, we are seeing farmers who are growing root crops such as yams in particular. Farmers are using a lot more mulch with that. So this reduces the dependence on the Ministry of Agriculture, while at the same time instituting a technology that is going to be key and critical for their success, and at the same time maintaining the soil health of our soils. So there has to be a twofold approach where we want to and are increasing the amount of tractor cultivation equipment and equipment for farmers, but at the same time, there also is an educational program which we are instituting, and that we are encouraging farmers to use other alternatives that would reduce the amount of cultivation practices they require.
Thank you, CAO. Honourable Member, I have also Mr. Athley, CEO of the BAMC. They did a tremendous amount of work at Wakefield. I encourage all Barbadians to go up there and see what they did. But when we were being told it would take too long to reverse this plantation and these soils because of the length of time they were out of production, the techniques that they use up there, I'm actually very pleased to report that the planting material that we have at Wakefield is perhaps some of the best that I've seen in a very long time. And therefore, I would ask him to comment just to give you an idea of some of the techniques that were used at Wakefield and the equipment that they used to cultivate the area and bring it back into production.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of Parliament. To the point raised by the Minister, what basically we did at Wakefield was that we went back to what we consider in the industry standard practices. That is that we, as the CEO pointed out, our cultivation program hindered upon the first cut with a caterpillar, then doing a second cut, not necessarily the next week, but within the recommended standards is not to degrade the soils. But one of the key things for us, I think, which led to the success of Wakefield, was that we did cut up the hard pan. And we have taken that as a position at BMC that we are currently doing in any lands that we are cultivating for sugar cane. And we're encouraging the other private farmers as well. To the CEO's point earlier, we were one of the recipients of over $3 million of equipment. But with COVID and the challenges of COVID, we are only now receiving the last set of equipment. And this is equipment that was ordered, I believe, November of 2020. What we also did at Wakefield to make it the success it is that we planted only treated cane that was free of ratoon stunting disease. For those who need a quick education in sugar cane, once you get a good quality planting material with the amount of rain, you then get the cane to grow a lot faster, which is what we call canopying. And when the cane canopies, then it shuts out the sunlight from getting to the weeds. So I think that is part of the problem. So the two things that made Wakefield a success. We stuck to the basic of cultivation. We cut up the hard pan for the whole of Wakefield. We did use clean planting material, which is a standard that we're pushing now within the industry. Basically, we use Caterpillar from local contractors. We also use heavy-duty tractors, about 120 horsepower, that are usually used in terms of cutting up the hard pan. We use subsoilers. We use rotivators as well as double gang harrows. So what the double gang harrows do is that you then do a first cut. You also get a fairly decent cut because of the amount of weeds that you have. So that has been a success for Wakefield, and that's why Wakefield has been a success for us.
Any further questions, Honourable Member?
Of course, Mr. Chair. Just a follow-up on that. For me, with the purchase of equipment, I think we have to consider the maintenance. I'm not one that like to sweep the issues under the table. And I could remember passing a guy, I think he was cutting grass, doing hair or something, and he had a big, 5-gallon of oil moving with, because they had a hydraulic leak. So for me, that is something that I take seriously if we're going to, I'm in the fan club of the Ministry of Agriculture. It's something I would like to see succeed. The other question is really to do again with the constituents and myself having an interest in urban renewal and any urban farming initiative. Now, when we talk about food and nutritional security, notwithstanding what's happening in the region with Russia and Ukraine, we have to think about how can we feed ourselves in the event, any adverse external event or external shock. What plans or any initiatives that the ministry will have in place, not only for backyard farming for general Barbados, but in the urban corridors, particularly in the areas like the city of Bridgetown?
Thanks for your question, Honourable Member. The LEARS project is designed for all persons within the urban corridor who are interested in getting involved in agriculture and taking advantage of the tremendous amount of opportunities that are available now to persons doing agriculture. We are currently at the stage where LEARS is going to be rolled out. Equally, the Pine Basin is before us for us to also roll out. Those areas will certainly be available to constituents of the city. And I give you the assurance that your constituents will have an opportunity to participate in both areas once the opportunity is there for them. The idea of bringing farmers who are within the urban corridor to LEARS and to Pine Basin is because we understand clearly that if we are going to be able to empower and enfranchise, then we must provide the opportunities to people. And you don't want to have a person traversing from the city to St. Lucie to be able to participate. And so we've done the project there. What was the other project? I hope I've answered your question, Honourable Member.
Yes, Minister. My third and final question, lest I be accused of asking for, it relates to food security in the form of a seed bank. Now, being involved in agriculture, I'm sure your team is familiar with some issues we had with some string beans recently. We also are familiar with the GMO crisis, where we have a number of seeds brought into the island that give you one crop. And sometimes they don't even give you the one crop, like in the case of the string beans. I have advocated within my ministry to ensure that we have a food and cloth bank, particularly for natural disasters and human disasters. It would be remiss of me not to pursue the same kind of questioning for our sister ministry of any Ministry of Agriculture in making sure that we have these seeds in order to, again, to be able to feed ourselves within the climate change and the disasters pending, and also to get better quality seeds so that farmers can have a better yield. On that, I know that we talked a bit about technology, and I heard about the drones, and I was wondering if we can tie in anything to do with the crop sensors, the smartphone monitoring, the ultrasounds, particularly with the livestock and those sort of things. Again, to have the CAO holder to have to answer that may be considered a fourth question, so no pressure there at all, just trying to tie it in. But the bigger point and the bigger question is in relation to the seed bank, to ensure that we can have the safety and better quality seeds for better yields. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'm actually happy that you raised that question and framed it the way you did, because I consider this to be extremely important to what we're doing. A lot of the questions that are being asked, you would have either received a report that we had a meeting yesterday with the poultry producers, looking at exactly the same thing to see how we can establish that type of system where if something should go off and create challenges with supply chains globally, that we have positioned ourselves to be able to produce and continue to keep the poultry industry as solid as it is. So we are looking at that. We've done an extensive discussion yesterday on it. Of course, we are doing this in conjunction with our partners in Guyana as well. But equally, we have also on board with us someone who has extensive experience in agriculture, a person who would have done agriculture successfully in Jamaica. And we're establishing a seed bank in Barbados so that we become the center of excellence for research and development. We will have our own seed bank. Let's assume that one day we got wiped out by a hurricane or something. We don't have to go scrambling anywhere to look for seeds. We would have had those seeds stored. This currently is about to happen, so this is not just talk. The person that we are working with already has a collection of seeds that we are going to be working with. We are also at the home agriculture station working on cling planting material for sweet potato and different crops. And within the ministry itself, Mr. Michael James can tell you about the work that they have been doing. Equally, we work with the FAO as well to give Barbados and our farmers an opportunity to get clean planting material. All these things we have been cognizant of the fact that we need to do this in order for us to be driving food security if we're really serious about food security, and also food sovereignty. And that is the reason why we are going to be establishing our own seed bank. Through a lot of the trials, you might very well go close to some practices that are close to GMO, but I do recognize that we have to look at all options that are available to us. Through the Agriculture Task Force that we worked with during the first period of COVID in 2020, we looked at how we can also do a number of trials to give us our own cultivars and transitioning us to growing a number of the crops and expanding it by looking at the success of them, and then keeping our own clean planting material. So those are some of the things we have been doing to address a lot of what you've asked. I'm particularly pleased to note that the one that nobody had looked at, we have already looked at, and that is how we can protect the one solid industry that we have in agriculture, which is poultry. Mr. James, you may want to speak to the clean plant material, and then I will have the CEO wrap up the conversation on this, because this is very, very important.
Honourable Minister, we want to wrap up at this point in time, giving you the opportunity to resume tomorrow.
I was inviting Mr. James just to do a quick explanation on the germplasm.
Okay, Honourable Minister.
Good evening, all. As the Minister was saying, clean planting material is essential. You can't start bad and good. You need to start with good planting material. So if in the ministry, over the years, we've looked at cleaning up sweet potato especially, and we've had a training course last year in association with both UWI and FAO to teach farmers on how to produce their clean planting material, and that was successful. So farmers left knowing how they could produce this. We have also brought in different varieties, whether it be from pigeon peas to yams. We have a variety called the Butu, which we came through from Martinique. And then we had some varieties of pigeon pea that came out of Mexico, and we have been producing those and building up enough so that we can extend those to farmers. And with that, we can look at not only producing more, but we're also looking at combating some of the pest problems that we have with these particular crops. Because, as I said before, once you start clean and you start good, you're capable of getting a better crop. Thank you.
Chair, I believe we would have come to answering the question with the one thing that was left outstanding is the censors. If you would allow, the CAO can quickly deal with it, and then I will be at your mercy for continuing tomorrow.
Yes, Minister, so permitted.
As it relates to the question on crop sensors and smartphones, we have actually started a project with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, as well as the Barbados Met Services, to look at how we could actually use weather data and sensors in the area to determine when there are pest and disease outbreaks. So we are trialing, or the intention is to start to trial this project at Spring Hall, as well as at our Graham Hall Agricultural Research Station there. And we are looking at butternut squash and tomatoes as crops that are impacted by whiteflies, and be able to use sensor data to determine when there's potentially a pest outbreak there. We're also looking at mildews in, it was tomatoes for whiteflies and mildew for butternut squash, as well as anthracnose in yams. So we've started to do that work as it relates to crop sensors. And obviously this then can be tied to phones. We have started to do desk-based research as it relates to sensors for livestock, because we are aware that with those types of sensors, it can help to tell us when animals are going to be sick. And this would then be able to help reduce animal illness, but also increase the output, particularly in animals like dairy. And then finally, wrapping up as it relates to germplasm, we do keep at the ministry cucumbers, local cucumbers, finger squash. Locally, we do keep pumpkin as well, in addition to the root crops. And we are looking at open pollinated varieties, which we could or be able to store at the home agricultural station to have that seed bank available. They're not necessarily going to be the highest yielding types of varieties, but in an adverse event, we would have seeds available in Barbados. So this is work that has already started and is ongoing. Thank you.
Honourable Leader of the House.
Chair, I beg to move that you do not report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do not report progress to His Honour the Speaker and ask leave to sit again. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. All members against, please say no, nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Chairman of the Standing Finance Committee has reported progress and asks for leave to sit again. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I therefore beg to move that this sitting be adjourned until
Suspended
until tomorrow, 24th of February at 3 p.m. in the afternoon.
The question is that this chamber be suspended until 3 p.m. on the 24th day of February 2022. I wish to inform members that lunch will be served as usual, so you can come and obtain lunch tomorrow. All of our members in favor of, not of the lunch, but of the suspension. I think the ayes have it. This chamber stands suspended until 3 p.m. 24th day of February 2022.